Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not quite sure where Brenda went, so I am going to go ahead and just start us off today. So again, good morning. My name is Ashley. My pronouns are she and her, and I am so excited to have you all be part of this presentation today. I am with the Arrowhead Agency on Aging, and we are going to be doing a session today on caring for our elders, how to get paid for providing care. So before we start, a few housekeeping items.
Sorry, Ashley.
No,
I got kicked off for a second. So,
that's okay.
So a few housekeeping items. We're excited to announce that today's webinar will be accessible to a wider audience. We have arranged for American Sign Language interpreters who will be present throughout the session. Those interpreters will rotate about every 20 minutes, ensuring that everyone can follow the content effectively. So whether you attend the live session or you catch up later, you'll have the opportunity to engage with the material in a way that suits your needs. As Ashley mentioned, we're recording the entire webinar with ASL interpretation. The recordings will be available on our Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging YouTube channel for later viewing. You can subscribe to that YouTube channel so you can keep up with the latest additions to our video library. Just a reminder to please keep your microphone set to mute. Just a note, if you experience any issues with bandwidth or audio quality, it often helps to disable your camera. If you have any questions during today's session, please feel free to enter your question into the chat and we will address them at the end of the presentation. We'll also take some additional questions at that time. At the close of today's session, you'll see a quick evaluation form that will pop up in your browser. Please take a moment and complete that survey. It helps us greatly when planning future sessions. We are always looking for suggestions for future webinar topics, things you want to learn about. So if you've got questions, you've got suggestions for topics or speakers that you'd like to hear from, please feel free to include those also in your evaluation. And one last reminder, please visit our Facebook page for more information about other upcoming sessions. You can also check out our website at arrowheadaging.org. Now, as we get started, if you'd like, you can feel free to enter your first name and your organization or the community that you're from, what you're hoping to get out of today's session and how you found out about it. And you may wonder, who is the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging? Well, the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging, we are one of the divisions of the Arrowhead Regional Development Commission. We're designated by the Minnesota Board on Aging as an area agency on aging for planning and service area under the Older Americans Act. So Minnesota has 7 AAAs across the state that are the local connections for older Minnesotans and community support as they age. The Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging's planning and service area includes the counties of Aiken, Carlton, Cook, Itasca, Coochin, Lake, and St. Louis. And we here at the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging are committed to helping older adults maintain their highest level of independence. Area agencies on aging are regional organizations that provide services and supports and information for just about everything that older adults and their families could need. Next slide. And we're going to take just a moment before we get started here, just to briefly go through our land acknowledgement. As we support our mission to help older adults maintain their highest level of independence, we do this while being respectful of the space that we are welcomed into by Indigenous people. We strive to deepen our understanding of the multiple ways in which people see and understand land and acknowledge the Indigenous people who have relationships with this land. We also acknowledge the decades of historical trauma, loss, and grief experienced by Indigenous people. It is our promise to not only recognize these truths, but also take action to show support of our Indigenous elders, neighbors, and friends, and understand our place within the past, present, and the future of this land. We know that this is just one step recognizing and honoring the sovereignty of tribal nations. So getting started, we are pleased to have here with us today Kristin Parendo. Kristin is the elder law lead attorney for Justice North out of the Duluth office, but she covers the entire 11 county Justice North region. So some of you may be taking care of an older adult, family member, a close friend at home, or you might be considering doing so. Many people do not realize that you might be able to receive payment for this important and loving work. Today, we'll focus on the steps needed to arrange compensation for providing in-home care and services and answer some of your questions. Kristin will be our guide to that process. So thank you, Kristin. Thank you for being here today, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you everybody for taking the time to attend. And if there's any questions I can't get to at the end of our session, feel free to contact me by email and I'll be happy to answer extra ones as well. So let's go to the next slide. So today I want to talk about how you can get paid for providing care to somebody. And this is primarily through a personal services contract. So I want everybody to know what it is, why it's a good option for long-term care, what do you need to have a valid personal services contract so you don't get into trouble with medical assistance, how to document reasonable compensation so you don't get in trouble for medical assistance, and what to have in that contract. Next slide. Before we get there, though, I want to talk about who Justice North is. And we're a nonprofit law firm in the Northeastern Minnesota area. And you can see where our offices are. We have 5 of them. And we are free. If you've got somebody who is 60 years of age or older and you think that they might need some help, we get funding from the Older Americans Act so we can provide assistance to people who are above the traditional legal aid income and asset guideline. So if they're 60 or older and in our service area for the Older Americans Act, please have them call. Next slide. Alrighty, so let's jump into why we're here. So this is a really amazing statistic. So who does long-term care in the home? It's family. It's 80% of in-home caregiving is done by family. Now, I can glide by that statistic, but I like to sit with it for a little while because that is it's just a huge number. And of course, it's mostly unpaid. And I had the statistic in my earlier presentation last month, where it's averaging 20 hours per week. And most of that work is done by women. And you can see that 14% of those folks giving the care are older folks themselves, age 65 or more. And then you can look at how does this relate to economics. In the United States, the latest figures are from 2021, $600 billion worth of care is given by family caregivers in the United States. In Minnesota, that's 10 billion with a B. And that's huge. So what I want to do with this presentation is give an idea about how you could get paid for providing care to a family member. So you're not doing it unpaid. 9.3% of us in Minnesota are family caregivers, giving 500 million hours of care. So I hope to help out a little bit with this because this is an option that is underused in my estimate. Alrighty, let's go to the next slide. So why have a personal services contract? So the first one, it's a really good tool for spending down your assets to become eligible for medical assistance. And you do it in a way that's safe because you are paying money for something that you get fair value for. You get a service that you want or need, and you're paying fair money for it. So you're not going to get into trouble for uncompensated transfers. Uncompensated transfers are what the medical assistance rules call gifts. So you're not making any gifts when you have a personal service contract. You're making reasonable payments to somebody, a family member, to provide you care. And that's a good way to spend your money, because you keep that money in the family. A lot of my clients they're concerned because they, quite rightly, they work their whole life to build up savings. They don't spend extravagantly for the most part during their lifetime. But as they get older, then they find out that they have to spend down that money to become eligible for medical assistance. For a single person, that's $3,000 in countable assets. For a married couple, it's larger. And a house is not counted for anybody, and some other things aren't counted. But all that other income in your bank accounts and other financial things, that has to be spent down. And you spend down on paying for cost of care, of course, but there's other things you can do. And paying somebody to provide care is one of them. And to do it safely, have a personal services contract to document it. And the reason why it's good to document too is because having this contract avoids family disputes after you die, because they can look back and see my parent created this contract to transfer money to my other sibling, perhaps to give care, and they gave the care. So there's proof that there was care given and it was a reasonable price for that care. So perhaps family members won't fight over those payments being given to a sibling, for example. And then maybe it's not necessary to give a larger share of the estate to somebody who's given the care, because everybody probably knows of families where there's one caregiver child, for example, who does the bulk of all the caregiving, and the parent wants to acknowledge that. So in their will, they say, I'm going to give a bigger share to, say, Mary, because she provided my care so I could live at home for as long as I could. Sometimes that's a problem because other family members dispute that, maybe thinking that they weren't able to make that decision when they made the will, or for some other reason. But it also is a good idea because of spending down. Sometimes there might not be anything left in the estate to share with your heirs. And this way, by paying them during your lifetime for care, you're making sure that they get that money during your lifetime for providing you care. And I highlighted one on this list that is pretty, that's the main point. It helps the family members providing care to be able to do it. People could then possibly reduce their hours at their work, or maybe retire early to take care of their family member. It's a really nice way to be able to do the things that you want to do, because everybody wants to be taken care of by people that they choose, and this is one of the ways to help get that done. And finally, I think it would help reduce elder abuse because it takes away some of that family caregiver stress when you can't afford things and you're trying to run around and do your other work to get a wage, and not, there's a finite amount of time in your life and a finite amount of ways to get money to do what you need to do. So this is a way to do it. Next slide. So the types of things that you can have somebody do for you in this type of contract are all the traditional activities of daily living and the instrumental activities of daily living. You can have somebody come in and help you bathe, get dressed, toileting, transferring. Incontinence care is a big one, because you pay a lot of money for that if you hire somebody to do it. So why not have somebody that you love to do it for you? Instrumental activities of daily living, of course, housework, doing the money management, paying the bills, doing your medication management, cooking, shopping, pet care, all those sorts of things. But there's more to that, and we'll see in the next slide, please. You can do other things with this contract as well. You can pay for transportation using the current mileage allocation. I had finance this on the other slide too, but I put it on this one too, apparently. Companion services, you can pay somebody to visit, go to appointments with you. Be your scribe, for example, if you go to doctor's visits or lawyer visits or any type of visit. Home and yard maintenance, room and board, and anything else you can think of that would be a service for you, you can put into this contract. Next slide. The guiding principle is to always know if you get fair value for your money, you won't get medical assistance ineligibility. This is why a personal services contract works. So you pay fair price for a service that directly benefits you. So you have to get the benefit. It can't be to anybody else. If you're paying, you get the benefit. And what is a fair value? So what the statutes do is they say a fair value would be reasonable compensation. So what's reasonable, you ask? Good question. So what's reasonable is what you would pay from a local provider of the same service. So you would go and take a survey of all the local providers and see what would you charge for doing this ADL on a certain rate, how many times a day that you estimate it would have to be, what would that be? If you charged higher than that in your contract, the difference between what a local service provider pays and what you're paying, if you did a higher one, that would be a gift. So you don't want to do that. You want to be the same amount as the local provider. And if you want to be extra safe, you could be a little bit lower, but there's no reason to do that. And the way to document it is you might have to pay for this, but you could go to the local provider and have them review your contract. What would you charge for these things? And then they could fill out an affidavit stating these things and then sign it correctly. And then you'd attach it to the contract. So that was your proof of why these things are reasonable. And this is the contract. And then you could provide it to the county as well. We'll get into it more. That's the general gist of it. If you're getting paid fair value, there's no problem. You're not going to be ineligible for medical assistance later on. Next slide. So this is where I put where you can find the laws, the rules, and the policy about personal services contracts. In Minnesota, you can see the statute there on the left. That's the one that says they don't want you to do uncompensated transfers, but there's some exceptions. So this is the statute that talks about the exceptions. And I have a slide that has the wording of that coming up. But there's also the eligibility policy manual from the Minnesota Department of Human Services that distills what the statute says into a manual that the county social workers and financial workers will look at to determine, is your contract okay? And then I have the Social Security Programs Operations Manual system that's called the PALMS. This is the manual that Social Security uses. And I put that there because medical assistance has to follow SSI rules. And you'll see coming up that certain things are allowed in the SSI rules as far as payment. And I wanted to put that citation in there. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so here's the nitty gritty. This is the statute that covers personal services contracts. So you can see this is an exception to the uncompensated transfer. So if you do a uncompensated transfer, that's bad, but this is an exception. You can see it says, it applies to payments for care or personal services provided by a relative. So relative, unless the compensation was stipulated in a notarized written agreement. So that just means it has to be in writing, and you itemize what the services are going to be. That was in existence when the service was performed. So you have to have the contract before you start doing the work. And the care or services directly benefit the person. Otherwise, it would be a gift to somebody else. And the payments made represented reasonable compensation for the care or services provided. So it says reasonable compensation. It's not defined, but I believe it is it's well accepted that reasonable compensation would be the same amount that you would have to pay a private person to do the services. And then the last sentence just says that it's the rule that says if you do a service and don't have a contract, you still can get paid if you ask for it within 60 days. Now, that was kind of like you either have a personal services contract or you get paid within 60 days of the date the service was provided. In my opinion, it's better to have a personal services contract because it's so well documented. If you just pay within 60 days, there's a chance that you might not have enough documentation to survive denial for medical assistance because you've made an uncompensated transfer. So a personal services contract is well worth the time because you've laid out quite a bit of documentation that will protect you later on. All right, let's go to the next slide. So we just kind of looked at the statute, but I listed them here so it's easier to see. Keep in mind this only applies to relatives providing care. If you're a non-relative providing care, you don't need a written contract. So you might say, what the heck was that about? What I think it's about is the difference between a non-relative giving care and a relative giving care. I think there's a history of an assumption that family members are going to provide free care to other family members. And unless it's put in writing that you're paying somebody for it, the assumption is it's going to be a free thing, that it was a gift by the caregiver to provide the care, which is nice sentiment, but in reality, people have a really hard time affording to live doing 2 jobs. And this is a way to be able to afford to give the care. And it's good for the person needing care because they can spend down in a safe way and provide keep the money in the family. And it works for society as a whole, in my opinion, because people get to live where they want to live and get care from the people they want to get care, and they'll probably have better outcomes as a result. So this is just an itemization. It's future ongoing care, not retroactive. Signed by both the person needing it and the family caregiver, notarized, dated. Everybody should have a copy. We'll get into more of the terms that could be in the contract later. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so I want to just touch on the eligibility policy manual about personal services contract, and it's the 2.4.1.3 rule. I'm highlighting that it's not needed for other services. So other services could be like non-personal care, things like lawn care, snow shoveling, tax preparation. If it directly benefits the person and it's the same amount you'd pay somebody else that's not, in the community to do the work. So for snow shoveling, if you would have to pay 20 bucks a snowfall to get your driveway plowed, you're okay paying somebody to do that. You don't need to have a personal services contract. You can see that it's kind of vague. Does this apply to family members? And it only lists 3 types of services. So it's kind of vague about what other services fall into this policy provision. So it's safer, in my opinion, to have a personal services contract, or you can spell out who's doing all of these things. So especially if you're a family member. So if you're a family member that's going to do the snow shoveling anyway, put it in that personal services contract. All right, let's go to the next slide. So here we come to another option. Some personal services contracts do prepayments. So prepayments are for prepaying for like room and board for a certain period of time, or services like for 6 months or something like that, more of a lump sum. So it's a bit of an unknown about whether or not this would be a successful way of prepaying, or if it would be viewed as an uncompensated transfer. Some county review would say that it would be an uncompensated transfer because you could might be able to get that money back because the service hasn't been provided, for example. In my opinion, because there's the rule that says medical assistance rules in Minnesota, the program medical assistance has to follow the SSI rules, and the SSI rules allow for prepayments, then it should be allowed in Minnesota as well. So what happens is in the SSI rules, they use the current market value of the service. So let's say rent, let's do a really low rent. Let's say $700 a month times length of time provided in the contract. So let's say 10 months for ease of multiplication. 700 times 10 is $7,000. So if the contract terms say that you could pay $7,000 to your child to pay rent if you're living in the child's property, and that would be okay. If this was instead, you can live in the child's property for your lifetime, then the calculation brings in the life expectancy tables that the Social Security has to put that into the equation as well, to see what value that is, to see if the amount, the lump sum prepaid is good or if it's too high. So if it's okay, then it's not going to be a problem for SSI rules or for medical assistance rules. Because there are times where prepayment can be a reason for a denial for medical assistance, I think it's best to consult the elder law attorney before doing a prepayment like that, just to make sure that you take advantage of any opportunity to minimize the denial. Because there's ways that you might be able to do it. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but elder law attorneys do these things all the time. We at Justice North don't do them very often, because if you're going to do a contract for personal services, it makes sense to go to a private elder law attorney who does them, and you can use that. You can pay them for it as a way to spend down as well. So if you come to us, I'd be happy to refer you to elder law attorneys in the area. You can also go to the Minnesota State Bar Association and put in the radius around your location and say you want a list of elder law attorneys to go to. So elder law attorneys are different than probate attorneys and estate attorneys or any other attorney, they could do the same things, but an elder law attorney, the main thing they know more than anybody else is medical assistance. And that's what you want. You want somebody to look at and craft a personal services contract that knows medical assistance and can avoid any potential problems. So they can draft it the right way. So long story short, the rules say it should work. Past history says that sometimes there's a hiccup and it could be a reason for denial, and then a basis for appeal would be these policies. All right, let's go to the next slide. So when you have a personal services contract, you're paying somebody to do something for you. That means the person that you're paying is going to have to pay taxes on their income. So there's three main ways that the caregiver might have a tax situation. So of course the income tax would come into play because they're doing a service for you, but it could also be self-employment tax if they're providing the care outside of the person needing care's home. So if you're providing services when you go to accompany a person to the doctor, for example, that payment might fall into a self-employment tax. And of course, if the person needing care is living with a family member and paying rent or room and board, there could be a rental income tax event that needs to be reported on the caregiver's income tax return. So please note, I have my disclaimer here. It's not tax advice because I'm not a tax expert. And please consult with an accountant or other tax expert. And this only applies when you're paying somebody for a service. It does not apply to gifts. So gifts are not taxable to the caregiver. Since I'm on a little tangent there, let's talk about how do gifts affect the person that gave the gift. So let's say a parent gave a gift to a caregiver child. No problem for taxes for a caregiver child. For the parent, there's probably no problem, and I'll tell you why. When you give a gift, if you give more than the yearly amount to a person, and I believe it's $18,000 per individual this year, somebody, if it's more than that, you have to file a declaration in your taxes. So it's just saying, hey, I gave this amount, it's over the 18,000 to my child this year. You don't have there's no tax to you that you have to pay at that point. The IRS just keeps track of all those declarations throughout your years. And then when you die, they go back into their storage and they dig up all those declarations and they add them up. And they take that total and add it to your estate that you had at the time of death. If it's large enough, then the estate will have an estate tax. And I believe it's over $1 million now that that figure has to be before you'd have an estate tax. So a lot of people, that's not going to be a problem whatsoever. So no estate tax really, and there's no problem for caregivers when they get a gift. So that's a tangent. Let's go back to paying for some services and dealing with taxable issues. So paying wages, the parent would have to withhold Social Security and Medicare taxes, and that amount would go to the government. Similar federal and state taxes paid to the government, and then the rest goes to the caregiver child. The tax time, they get a W-2. Now you might be saying, whoa, this sounds like too much trouble. I don't want to do it. And I agree, that would be a lot of trouble to do. But there are some companies or organizations that will do payroll and W-2 for just individual people that want to pay somebody for services. So my recommendation is to use that company to do that sort of thing. And let's go to the next slide. Oh, and I should say it's also good documentation that that you got fair value for your services. It's all well documented, not a gift. So what is reasonable compensation? I talked about this earlier a little bit about finding out what local companies charge for their services that they do. Before you do that, you want to list what services you think you're going to need. So you look at what kind of activities of daily living, all those things, what other services might be useful. List them all out and then decide, does it make more sense to pay an hourly wage or should this be a prepayment situation? I would say the hourly is more common and it might be the best way to do it because you hold on to your money so you can use it for other things as well as paying for those services. It's kind of a balance for you. You could take a crack at drafting a personal services contract, or you could go to another law attorney to do it. And I would then bring that to a local service provider and ask for a consultation, see if they would take a look at the services that you have listed and tell you what they charge for it. And take a look at the medical conditions that you have to see if it's common to need these type of services. So that gets to, it's directly benefiting the person because this is a typical need. And other services listed that the local agency won't do, it's good for them to say that as well, because that shows that there's more value for that family caregiver to be paid for that because you can't get that service anywhere. And then the local service provider could do a notarized affidavit just to document those charges and those opinions. And then if possible, sometimes you could have the social services department take a look at the contract to see if there's any red flags that they see before it's actually used. So modifications can be done. And then once it's all set, meets all the requirements, everybody signs in front of a notary public, and you sign it and date it, and then everybody should have one for themselves. Sometimes what I do for documents is to have identical, more than one ready, and then everybody signs each one. So everybody has an original. It's maybe not necessary for this. But if you were ever to have to record it with the county recorder's office, you have to have an original. So it's nice to have signed originals for everybody to have. So it just means everybody signing more than one at the time. All right, let's go to the next slide. So what you include in the contract is, and these aren't all of the terms that you could put in it. These are just some of the main ones. You want to put in the purpose of the contract. That's really good to have because it shows why you're doing it. It shows that you're both getting something out of the deal. We call that consideration. The parent is getting services and care. The caregiver child is getting payment for providing that service and care. So that's a valid contract when both sides have consideration. And they make promises to each other. So there's going to be obligations for both the caregiver and the person needing the care. So that promises and consideration in law, that's a valid contract. I would also probably, to show the purpose of the contract, also have some documentation about the health conditions or diagnosis that the person needing care has in order to show why these services are provided and to show that these services really will directly benefit the person needing them. Have the basic information about that situation and the parties so they can be identified. I would also say that the person needing the services could say that they've considered all of their options and this is the best option to choose. Of course, have the payment rate for the itemized services with maybe a minimum amount of hours per month to be provided. And this is information that you're going to find out from the local services provider. Of course, the obligations, you're going to pay a certain rate, how much person's going to provide, which services, all those things. The length of the contract, is this going to be a 12-month contract? Is it going to be an ongoing contract? You want to put something in there to say how long it is. And then of course, how to terminate the contract. Who can terminate it? When can it be terminated? What kind of notice? Most likely you want it to be terminated by either party and maybe upon 30 or 60-day notice, written notice, or maybe another termination clause if the services can no longer be provided by the family caregiver, then either party could terminate upon earlier notice, something like that. Of course, all the signature blocks, the notaries, jurat blocks, dates, things like that. And if you go to an elder law attorney, they'll be able to show you some examples. I didn't put examples in this presentation, but I do have some examples as well if you come to see us about it. So let's go to the next slide. After you make the contract, you want to continue to document everything. Just don't rely on the contract itself. You want to have timesheets. You want to have a log and a journal, just basically what's going on. Because if you're providing care, I would essentially act like a healthcare provider. I would have care notes when you go do something to provide type of, the ADLs. If you go to a doctor's visit, I would say the purpose, date, time, what was discussed, what was the plan after that. Just basic notes, and keep any receipts that are generated through the course of providing that care. The person who's paying, they should, of course, withhold the taxes from the compensation and pay those to the appropriate government revenue agency, either the state or the federal, and get the W-2 to the caregiver. Caregiver, of course, they may have to file taxes on that income. So on their annual income tax return, they would put that on there and provide the W-2. And then, of course, with any legal document, you want to review it periodically to see if it should be revised or if it's meeting everybody's needs or if it should be modified into a new contract. And let's go to the next slide. And here we are at the end. So this is a shorter presentation than last time. So we've got plenty of time for questions. And if we answer all the questions about personal services contracts, I'm happy to answer other questions that people might have too.
All right, so I think we'll just start out with some of our questions here. So from Chris, who should be given this care contract? If it's the county, to who? Should other family members, their doctor, who should get the contract?
The people who should get it, of course, are the parties in the contract. So if it's a parent and a child caregiver, then those two people. But also, if they have a team at the county, which is the social worker team or financial worker, they should give a copy to the county. And if they wanted to share it with other people, that's okay as well. Keep in mind, if you share things with other family members, if they're prone to be argumentative, it might be a source of argument, but it might be a source of enlightenment too, to show other family members, like other children, hey, this is what our parent needs. and the services that are being provided. And maybe this is our clue that we could partake more in the parent's life. Or, hey, this is really good service and I'm glad my sibling's getting paid.
Something else, creating some transparency in those relationships.
Yeah.
I did share in the chat the link that you mentioned for the Minnesota Bar Association's Find a Lawyer directory. Next question we have is, so you can give up to $18,000 per year as a gift to a family member without penalty?
So that's a very good question, because it's without penalty. $18,000 per year per individual is the tax rule, which is totally different than medical assistance rule. So if you gave somebody $18,000 in cash, it's going to be viewed as an uncompensated transfer for medical assistance unless you show that you got fair value for that $18,000. So there will be a penalty for medical assistance unless you got fair value for it. So the answer is they're two different areas of law, and they both have their own traps. So no trap for IRS if it's below 18,000, you don't have to declare it. But there's a trap for medical assistance if you can't show fair value. If that makes sense.
All right. And Chris asks, do you have an example of a personal service contract to share with?
I do have them. I do have examples, but they're not, we don't do them, so they're not particularly mine. So I didn't share them in this slideshow because I don't know if there's a copyright or there's I need permission first. But I do know that private elder law attorneys do these things, and they would be able to show the ones that they've drafted. But I've got them, which I can consult. And if you absolutely can't find somebody to draft one, we could possibly draft one for you. But I really would prefer having somebody go to a private elder law attorney, because we've got other things that are more suited to Justice North.
And Kathleen asks, do husbands and wives qualify for compensation as well?
Yes. So the relative just has to be related, and spouses are related to the person needing care. So it could be, well, wait a minute. I'll have to think about that. So this is where medical assistance is tricky. I'm going to have to look into that more closely, because now I'm second guessing myself. So don't pay anybody don't pay your spouse yet until I get back to you.
Okay. And Wendy asks, who and when would this personal services contract need to be presented? I think that kind of addressed that in Chris's earlier question, that to all of the parties that are part of that contract, and potentially to their county team, as well as other family members if you chose to.
So if I understand it correctly, the question is, when should you do a personal services contract?
Who and when would this contract need to be presented? So when would you ever need to present it, and who would you present it to?
Okay. So if you ever have to apply for medical assistance to pay for long-term care, and you would know if you have to apply because you've spent your money down to the eligibility limit, because then you wouldn't be able to pay anybody for those services any longer. So then, of course, when you apply for medical assistance, you're going to provide that personal services contract to show that those payments weren't gifts. They weren't uncompensated transfers. And you would attach that to the application, and that would be a way to prove that you got fair value. And you would provide other verifications as needed in the application process, such as other documentations like timesheets, W-2s, that affidavit, if that affidavit from a local service provider wasn't in the contract, you provide that as well. So you hang on to it until you need to show that you got fair value for it. But ideally, if you have the chance to get it pre-approved by the county, you could present it before using it.
Anyone else have any questions? You can feel free to either put it in the chat or take yourself off of mute to ask those questions. Like giving just enough time that it makes people uncomfortable. It draws things out of people.
Kristin, this is Wendy. I do have a question. So if a couple has financial, they're well invested, or they have plenty of money to take care of their care, does this all come into play when they start getting down to in their funds and they know they're going to need more financial help? So, or would this still apply to anybody? I have a aunt and uncle. They're both in their 90s, and their son is taking care of them in their home, and they're well off. They saved for many years. So when they come down to the end of their finances and they're still going to need care, is this when this would come into play, or should it come into play now?
Wendy, that's a very good question. It's better to have one earlier, in my opinion, because then the child can benefit from those payments as well. But certainly, if you're looking to be eligible for medical assistance, within a year or two, it's not too late to do a personal services contract. It's an excellent way to spend down. It's a good way to spend down, even if you think you're going to be able to afford care for a long time. If you're very wealthy and are able to pay for long-term care for more than 5 years, then perhaps it's not as critical, because if you then if you're able to do that, you're most likely not going to be needing medical assistance. But more than that, if you find you need medical assistance, when you get close to the 5 years, you can do a big gift for the 5-year look back, and then it's not even considered a gift because it's not even looked at. So it depends on how much money we're talking about. If they have huge amount of money, I would say maybe it's not worth it, but it might be worth it to the caregiver child to be able to get the wages to live on. But for a lot of the middle income folks, which is most everybody, I think a personal services contract would be worth it.
Yeah. I know with the two of them, like I say, they're both in their early 90s, and two of them were in a facility at $20,000 a month. That doesn't take long to eat through your savings.
No, it doesn't. That's for sure.
Thank you.
And it sounds like, Kristin, like this would be a really good part of that conversation that, we see a lot of people who come to, and I'm sure you guys do, in an emergent situation when it's a crisis time, rather than having the conversations way out before we even need the services, and making a plan for what is this portion of our life going to look like, and how are we going to plan for this, and really taking that long view of things as well.
Right. It's more of a disability planning tool, if you want to think about it that way. Once you get a diagnosis or a condition is cropping up where it's impacting your activities of daily living, that's when you want to start thinking about, what is this likely going to look like in my future? What kind of services and cares am I going to likely need? And how can I pay my family member to provide that care? And
that's a really empowering thing for people to be able to recognize, to realize, that for the things that they might fear about the future, that a lot of that is in their control and in their power to plan for and to be aware of those options beforehand. so that we're not making decisions when we are in a more critical situation.
That's a
Right.
good point.
And you're able to have more power and control over where you get that care. Like
Mm.
probably be able to live at home more, and you'll be with people that know you and know what you want and love you.
Mhm. Absolutely. Any other questions? Anyone? Well, I think if there's no other questions, I think we'll wrap things up for today. Thank you so much, Kristin, for this. I have worked when I worked for Senior Liechtenstein with a lot of clients who this information would be so beneficial for. And so I'm going to make sure to pass this on to other folks that I know as well. I don't think it's something that people don't think about when they're thinking about spending down. They think about, well, what things can I buy and stuff like that, rather than how can I take control of the decisions in my life and my care and things like that through tools like this. So thank you so much for being willing to come on here and to share your insights and your knowledge with us. We are going to have our upcoming webinars. We've got ones coming up on April 9th on understanding and interacting with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. We'll be back with Kristin in a couple weeks or a few weeks on April 17th for Aging Solo, making a plan for navigating the future. We've also got, for organizations, we have a session coming up on bridging data and community action, really talking about some good data sources that that the Quad A has compiled, and how someone could potentially use those for grant seeking and things like that. As always, we do have recordings of our sessions and past sessions, and so you can go on to our YouTube channel and check those out. A lot of interesting things on housing and age-friendly efforts in the region, and et cetera, et cetera. So please check those out. Again, just a reminder, as you're exiting, you will be seeing an evaluation pop up. Please complete that for us. It's pretty quick, but it does help us with coming up with great topics and fine-tuning our setup for webinars. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.